Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining the breakout session with Harvey. Harvey will be leading you through the innovation impact. So Harvey, I'll hand over to yourself to go ahead. Lovely. Thank you very much. Over to you, Harvey.
Great. Thank you.
High expectations, Harvey.
Thank you, Roberto. Right, that probably doesn't help that I'm sharing the end slide, does it? Here we go. So let me just check everything's there. So hi, welcome to, I think, the best session. I'm actually presenting with my good friend Ian Pallister, who I'll introduce in a moment. And we're going to be telling you a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing when we were forced to lock down, really thinking about innovation, thinking about how actually we make innovation better. I'd also like you at a certain point, we're going to move into a bit of an interactive Miro session, which is the way for strategy tools. Of just giving us some feedback on some tools that we're starting to develop and starting to use, and just really get your feedback and how this could help you with your clients. So that's the plan for today. I hope to make it as discussional as we can. Otherwise, you're just going to be hearing from me, and an hour of that is not good for anybody. So let's make sure we have some discussion going on. You don't have to nod, Roberto. You don't have to agree that much. So what we're going to be doing. So let me move into my slide. How do I move the slides along? Here we go. A fact, and if it's from McKinsey's, it must be true. So 94% of managers are dissatisfied with innovation performance. We saw this stat, Ian and myself, and we're like, how can this be true? I mean, we love innovation. We know it's not perfect, but we kind of thought it doesn't always deliver what's needed. And I'm sure everybody's got a few war stories about the innovation they've been involved in and the innovation that they wish they hadn't been involved in. But innovation needs to be better to deliver the impact needed. So Ian and myself started to really sort of think about this actually at the beginning of last year. We started to think about, well, what do we mean about innovation? What does that look like? So here we are. So just to give you a background on myself, I've led innovation programs in Allianz, a large insurer, in Cisco. I've worked with many organizations across from oil and gas manufacturing through to retail. The Australian mine was interesting. But I've been doing a lot around innovation, very practical outworking of innovation. I'm based in the UK. Ian, why don't you just introduce yourself? You can do a better job than I do there.
That's a nice photograph. I don't look as young as that anymore. It's the classic approach, isn't it? Make yourself look better. Well, that speaks for itself. I mean, I've worked in innovation advisory for the best part of 20 years, notably with, firstly with Gemini Consulting, and then with some Gemini colleagues. We formed a company called Innovaro. We eventually sold that and merged with a company called Strategos, and I ended up heading up the European division for Strategos for many years. And I'm now working as a freelancer. And the topic of how to make innovation better has been something I've worked on throughout those 20 years. So not focusing on the front end, for example, or not focusing just on strategic innovation, but focusing on how does innovation garner impact from the front end all the way through to experimentation in market and ultimately implementing in the market, and subsequently following up and understanding that over a period of years, innovation continues to have impact. And Harvey has a similar interest in it. As he said, we've put some thoughts down around how we can help our clients do that through a framework.
Thank you, Ian. So what we want to do is to just share some of those thoughts with you, which we hope will be helpful, and how it also links into some of the work around strategy tools and the work that you're probably doing in your own organization and businesses. So we started to think about innovation, what's the impact, and then all of a sudden this thing hit, and we were like, we need innovation more than ever. Disruption is coming. People need to do things differently. And actually, they don't just need to do things differently. They need to have the better results. And there's another stat that came from actually Friends of Strategy Tools. This is Scott Anthony from Insight in his HBR article, but more than 90% of companies are unhappy with their innovation performance. It's not that they're not doing innovation. It's not they're not doing great activities. It's not they haven't got great people doing it, but they're just not getting the performance that they're looking for. It's almost like the leaders are promised this, these diamond rings, this sort of pot of gold, and they end up getting a bit of bronze or a bit of silver, and they're like, it's good, but it's not quite what we wanted. So we started to think about, myself, what was the problem? Because innovation as a management discipline has been around for about 40 years, but organizations find it really hard to build systematic capability and demonstrate innovation value and impact. But we start to think, well, that's the problem. But why could that be the problem? Because innovation is inherently difficult to measure, manage, and create that truly systematic impact. And here's some of the reasons. You can read them for yourself. But a lot of innovation is focused on the front end. A lot of people shout around doing hackathons, ideation workshops, stuff that I always see young people doing. Like, okay, I can work with the best of them, but it might not give us the results that we need. Organizations can't often answer what the role of innovation is. What does that need to be? And it's not approached in a systematic way. It's not embedded as a sustainable organization capability. It really doesn't link with what the organization is trying to do in a strategic way. And because therefore all those things exist, it often has very unclear set of objectives. Leaders often say, well, go innovate. What does that mean? And therefore innovation is often poorly managed and measured because people don't actually know what they were looking for in the first place. So our purpose and what we're looking to really achieve is a better innovation and deliver innovation impact through that. So why are we talking to you about this? Well, as you'll probably be aware, for those that have been involved in strategy tools for a little while, there's this thing called the Transformational Company. You may have heard about it, may have done a few things on it. But one of the principles in that, fifth principle, is develop your innovation strategy. And we wanted to kind of think, well, actually, it sounds, 4 words, sounds very simple. There's a lot in that. So we started to think about how could we help you to unpack some of those things. There are some canvases that would help you. So we've got the strategy intro tool, which really talks about those horizons of thinking, the core, what's in your core business models, your growth areas, and you explore. And absolutely that is relevant to your portfolio with innovation. But again, it's kind of stopping at a certain point. And then you've got finally the minimum innovation strategy. That's not easy to say. Built on some of the work that Cisco's done in terms of how they hit those 5 areas and how they get the innovation they need. But for us, we're really thinking about how do you build this all within an organization's, within their capability. And it's something that leaders get and understand their role. So we've got a framework. And what I want to do is now talk through that framework, just very briefly, and then get you to sort of think about, well, how could I use this to work on some of these exercises? How could I use this with my clients? So actually, I'll pause there. Ian, any thoughts just that you wanted to add in before we talk about the framework, about the linking in between sort of strategy and innovation that we've seen?
No. I think you've covered it very well, Harvey.
Okay. Just very aware that I'm talking too much sometimes. So, so with the Better Innovation Framework, we've got 3 stages. And we probably need some better names, but we're thinking this is our working titles to start with. So we've got our first stage is around strategy, and that's really embedding innovation into the future strategy. And you'll be familiar with this if you're doing anything around the building the transformational company, around what are your ambitions, what are you trying to achieve? And for us, innovation is very much around in that conversation. About 10 years ago, I would say that innovation was done by the guys drinking Diet Coke and wearing shorts and flip-flops, and strategy was done by the CFO and the accountants. What I'm finding now is those are merging together. You've got this innovation strategy coming together, which is coming to this strategic innovation and being understanding what we need innovation to do for us as an organization. So that we'll talk a bit about that in just a moment. Operational. So enabling the organization to actually innovate. And there's a lot in that in terms of sometimes the leaders say, yes, let's go and innovate, but the organization just doesn't know how to do that, doesn't know how to make it happen. And then we've got managing. So how do you build the culture? How do you really measure that you're getting the impact that you were looking for when you first started to do this? So let me just unpack those 3 stages. So stage 1 is around strategy. So embedding innovation into future strategy. So this is really making sure that leaders understand the imperative for change within their organization. You kind of get why you need it. And that's going to be sort of, the writing's on the wall. You understand why you're trying to do this. I've often found that leaders will sometimes sign up to, yeah, we need to change, but don't change on my watch, because that's too risky. But actually the understanding that they are really building for the future. There's a great quote by Jeff Bezos that says, if I spend any time thinking about today's business, I've failed in my role as a leader. They should always be looking for the future. And then the second part of that is really developing the innovation ambition to create success. And there's a lot of leaders that say, I want a fantastic innovation. I want all these things. And then they expect it to be done for free. They expect to be done without any budget, without any resource, without the capability that's needed. So this is making sure that leaders, if you really want to change, if you really want and understand that imperative, you need to fund it. And what does that look like? And if you can't fund it, then you need to dial back your ambitions and making sure that they're meeting the expectations through what they're trying to achieve. So that's the strategic side of things. And then we move down into, okay, let's try and think about how we operationalize this. How let's make this happen? How do we enable the organization to innovate? And so this is all around executing the innovation program for the organization. This is around thinking about that roadmap of change, who's doing it, making sure that every part of the organization understands their role in innovation. They understand what they need to do, not do. And then it's around where a lot of people focus in innovation, around building processes and tools to support innovation. There's a lot of people that teach innovation training, innovation tools. I mean, I do it myself. However, what often happens is we get a lot of people excited about innovation, but they don't have the framework to make things happen because the leaders don't get it. Or the environment's not there for them to use their tools, or it's too risky for them to use their tools. So this is really why we are not focusing on this at the beginning, because it's a little bit of a shortcut and a bit easy. You can get a good reaction, but it doesn't give you the lasting impact that you need without the strategic side taken into account. And then finally, we've got the managed side of things. So this is really around building the culture and measuring the impact of the innovation that you're doing. So by being really clear about what you need innovation to do for you, by being clear about your ambitions, about how much you're going to fund it, you can therefore come up with some very, very clear measures, some performance that you're looking for, and you can measure your progress against it. I've seen so many innovation teams that are given 2 years. Hey, go explore, go find things out, go do things. And they have a lot of fun, but they don't quite understand what value they need to bring back to the organization. Year 3, there's a bit of a funding change. Somebody senior, there's a leadership change. You go, hey, what have you delivered for me? And they go, well, we've done lots of fun stuff. Yeah, what have you actually delivered? What value have you delivered? And they don't know. And that was never clear at the beginning. And if you ever spot when an innovation team is saying, hey, what do we do? Hey, we just explore. I would say they've normally got a year or 2 of rope, and then it's going to get yanked and they'll find out how good they are at scrambling. And within that whole piece is around, for me, this is not a team that does innovation somewhere in the organization. There are those that have specialisms, but this is around creating that culture where people understand that innovation is the part of what we do in the organization. And we're creating a culture, we understand why we're doing innovation, we're engaged in it. And therefore, as comes in ideas and problems, which can create ideas, can come from anywhere. And we need to be really working on that and making sure that can happen. Some people focus on culture more than they focus on the strategic side. So there's great culture, but don't often deliver the value that they need. So for us, it's a mix of both. So that's our framework. which is kind of talked through in rapid speed. Ian, is there anything you wanted to add before we go into anything else to go a bit deeper into this?
Yes, just perhaps one final comment on that, Harvey. I mean, I see many innovation frameworks and processes, which, you know, they go well beyond the front end and all that good stuff that you've mentioned. They actually look to implement, you know, products, concepts, new business models in market. So, you know, they're going through what I would call the experimentation phase and then the launch phase. And they often think, you know, aren't we great? We've gone further than most innovation teams. But actually that measure and monitoring part is constant, yeah? I mean, you should be measuring and monitoring the success of those in-market products, you know, for 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, up to 10 years, in some industries up to 20 years. So I think that's what we're trying to get across here, is that the measurement of innovation goes well beyond, you know, how many ideas did we get into, you know, a particular stage, and even how many products and services, new concepts, business models did we get to the market. That's not the end point of the measurement. That's actually the starting point of the measurement and the management.
Thank you, Ian. Has anybody got any questions before I launch into something else?
Yeah. Hi, Harvey.
Hey.
Actually, I have a question regarding structure, so I don't know if this is the right moment to ask it. But when I started reading a lot about new ways to understand innovation, and I was myself leading an innovation effort in a large Central American company, I came across the work of Alex Osterwalder, and he was starting to advocate for even having completely different structures, even having a second CEO, which he named CIO.
Yeah.
So do you think that within current context where speed of change is, you know, is so overwhelming with the different dynamics in terms of how now teams work, what are your thoughts regarding the right structure to drive innovation, let's say within a large corporate setting?
It's a great question, and I don't think there's one answer. I'll be really honest with you. And one of the things that we try and do within that first part of the strategic side of things is really understand the way that the organization works. Sometimes it's a very centralized function, and therefore innovation almost needs to match that in terms of that sort of hub and spoke kind of reaction. Sometimes it's they love to give lots of empower out to the satellite offices. Sometimes it could be something completely, you know, something completely separate, because the current thinking is so ingrained into how they do things, and they need something completely different. And that's one of the things, and we'll get to a little bit more about when we can start to think about, well, what's right for your organization might not be right for somebody else, but there is not one right way. So I think we can probably talk about some of those answers when we talk about sort of how we would sort of move on and use this in anger. But those are my initial perspectives. I've seen it done in lots of different ways, and it really depends on sometimes the setup of the organization, the type of leadership you've got, the type of sector that you're in, can vary a lot on those kind of things, lots of variables. Ian, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, a lot of the work I've done on innovation impact came from a project I did about 15 years ago with a very large media company. And they gave us enough budget and enough time and the permission to go around the world and talk to as many leading innovating companies as we could, and as many chief executives or chief innovation officers as we could find. And, you know, we went to the West Coast of the US, went to Silicon Valley, we went up to Washington State, to Microsoft, we went across to General Electric, we went to Asia, we went to Europe. We talked about 30, 40 companies that you typically see on those lists of the world's best innovators. And what we tried to do was put together what we considered to be best practice across those 40 companies. And one of the key things that came out around structure was the chief innovation officer is the chief executive, okay? So the chief executive drives innovation. I mean, clearly you have senior folks in the organization who are experts in the field who work with you and work for you. But from a structural point of view, it starts with the chief executive. How you then organize to get the most impact from innovation, as Harvey said, really does depend on a whole range of different things. Depends on the way you're organized as a company. Depends on your geographic scope. It depends on, what is your time to market? Are you, fast moving consumer goods? Are you in the oil industry? They have slightly different ways of actually structuring themselves. So I don't think, as Harvey said, there's a right and wrong answer. I think in many ways, the innovative organization is somewhat dependent upon your strategy and your ambition and the processes and tools that you want to run, and actually the impact you want to get from innovation and how you want to measure and manage it. I always say that the structural part comes last. And indeed, whilst you can put in a sort of default structure at the beginning, you really want to be looking to, tweak and look to change that as far as possible as you go through, firming up the ambition and the processes and tools and the metrics, because it's going to change dependent upon what you find in those first 5 areas.
Thank you. Roberto, does that answer your question? I'm not sure whether it helps, but does it answer your question?
No, I think that this definitely opens a huge discussion. It's interesting. I thought that it was thought-provoking at that moment. And actually what made sense to me is that not necessarily the incentives that are behind a CEO will promote really taking the risks, and because they're still very short-term focus. So, that's where it will be interesting how organizations start to think about, or even boards really start to think how to compensate their top management, especially if there is definitely a shift to look at companies like Tesla that, are completely disrupting. So I think it's very insightful. Thanks.
Thank you, Roberto.
Maybe I could just say one further thing, Harvey.
Sure.
Let me just give you a real example. So Harvey and I are potentially looking to start work, if we sign the contract this week, potentially looking to start work next week with a utility company in the UK. It's a water company. So, fairly old-fashioned in the way that the role of the innovation team, or the research and innovation team, as they call it, again, is fairly old-fashioned and traditional. And one of the reasons they've asked us to come in and take a look at what they're doing is because they're not entirely sure that the structure that they have and the roles that they have and the linkages that they have to the rest of the organization is optimal in terms of getting the impact for their organization. They're just about to start a transformation program with McKinsey, and they're concerned that that might have an influence on their structure, and I guess they're trying to get their retaliation in first in some ways, and they're asking us to come in and take a look. Now, in that situation, they have an existing structure, which I would suggest that we would recommend some changes to. In other organizations, you start working with them and they don't really have much idea how they want to be structured. They're fairly, I wouldn't say relaxed, but they're fairly agnostic as to how you then work with them to recommend a new structure. The other extreme might be you work with an organization that is very advanced in the innovation field, and there's not a great deal that you can change in terms of a structure. It's more about bringing them up to speed with maybe better processes, new tools, maybe new ways of measuring innovation. So again, it really does depend, Roberto, on the maturity of the organization.
Well, thank you, Ian. So one of the things we wanted to start doing, and I will talk about a little bit after we've done our exercise about how our process actually works when we work with organizations. But what I wanted to start doing, and this is something I wanted to test with you, and we can't do breakout rooms, they're not going to work, so we're going to have to sort of work somehow together, is how can you, if you're not an innovation either expert or you dabble in it, but it's not something that you do on a regular basis, and maybe you don't have that confidence about getting involved, how could you spot that maybe there's a problem? How could you start to go with a leader? Actually, I think your innovations sort of process or system might be not quite delivering what you need to do. Now, they might tell you that straight off. So that might be a good way to spot it. But if you don't, and what we've developed is a series of questions that you can start to use in a in a way that you could start to sort of go, if it's a sort of a negative answer to the question, there might be something that you need to think about. Now, in a classic kind of strategy tools way, and by the way, this is kind of our proprietary information. We haven't not sharing it freely yet. It's still under test. Please don't share this widely with everybody. Is very clearly around, here's a framework, but if you ever, and Roberto, we would have learned this from when we were in Norway last year. If you ever get into a CEO and have to start drawing a framework, something's gone wrong. You kind of need to get this and understand this within your head and some of these key questions that you need to start asking. So I'm going to show you a slide that's got lots of questions on. And I was thinking, that's not a very good slide. I don't like that slide. So I thought I'm going to create, with my inspiration being Christian, a canvas that we could start using. So here's the canvas, and I have got a Miro board set up, which we could go into. But what I thought would be really interesting is these are the questions that we've got, and hopefully you can see those okay coming through. You can see that there's the six elements, and there's three, and for one, there's 4 questions for each section. And this is a question, if you ever ask an innovation, let's just say they run the innovation team, they will normally say, I think my innovation's fantastic, because they're used to saying that. However, this is not aimed at the innovation team. This is aimed at the leadership team who are either paying for that team or expecting the results from that team. So this is very much aimed at the sort of the C-suite or people responsible for that innovation team. And I think this is where you're starting to use it. So it's purposely not asking them about what methodologies do you use. This is starting to help them to understand whether they are enabling the organization to be in a good space to innovate. So what I thought we could do, we've got kind of a lot of time. So I've got a Miro board. Now the challenge I've got is us kind of, I thought we could all work together. Well, I thought we could break you into breakout rooms, but that wasn't set up. So I've got a Miro board set up. And what I would like you to do, and I'm going to put this link into the chat if I can manage to multitask. Let's just do that to everyone. Very happy if you wanted to go into that Miro board. And what I'd like you to think about, there's 4 groups. There's only one group. We can't really chat. So we'll all go into the Miro board together. And I'm going to just stop sharing my screen for a moment here. So if we can all go into the Miro board. Hopefully people are able to get into that, and I've allowed the access. I can see some of you in it. I don't care which kind of board you want to go in, but what I'd like you to really think about is imagine your work. So choose a leader or a client or yourself and start to go through these questions. And if you ask the leader, so let's start for the first one, strategy, embed the imperative. Do you understand and recognize the significant challenge your future brings? So if they're sitting there with their, or they're sitting there with their head in the sand, no, it's all fine, everything's going to be okay. Now, I work a lot in the insurance industry, and they all think everything's going to be fine. I keep trying to tell them it won't be, but they keep on thinking everything's going to be fine. So so maybe start to think about that. How would you go into that? Then, do you know how your organization needs to change to give you sustainable success? Now, that isn't sustainable in terms of the green sense, it's sustainable as in it's repeatable. It will kind of keep building on itself. And are you clear on what your organization's future state needs to be? Now, you can see that there's linkages here with a lot of the building the transformational company, because you start off a lot in the same kind of space, but this is then going deeper into the innovation space. So what I'd love you to do is, I'm not going to share this because sharing this and on Zoom really confuses people to have a Miro board shared on Zoom, because people try and click the Zoom and it really doesn't work. So does anybody want to kind of be our guinea pig and say, hey, I'm happy to I can think of a client that I'd like to work through this one for, and be happy to sort of go through that, and we can sort of expand that. That'd be really useful to do. Does anybody have want to be my willing volunteer to do that? Rob's giving me his apology, so he's going. Does anybody want to give us a go? Harvey, you've come off mute, so does that mean yes?
Yeah, let's do this, Harvey.
Okay, so I'm looking at group 1 board. So do you want to,
Okay,
who are you choosing? Who's in your mind when you're doing this?
They are a company that is focused on the financing low-income population. Okay.
Yep. Okay. So great. So let's just start working out how to do Marable. So let me maybe, I'm going to get the pen option, I think.
So, okay, I can begin with all the questions.
Yeah.
So, basically it's yes and no, okay?
Yeah. There would always be kind of, but you're kind of just getting somebody to think, is it broadly positive or is it broadly negative? I was thinking, do I put a scale in there? I thought actually a kind of, you know, black and white, yes, no, helps you to spot those things. So great.
Yeah, okay. So the first one, I think that it's a yes. I mean, they see the challenges that the future is bringing. Do you know how your organization needs to change? I would say yes, but the other one, no.
Okay. Cool.
Have you expressed the key focus areas? I would say yes in this one, no on the next one, and no here. Okay.
Let's just stop there, Javier. That's fantastic. So I think one of the things that you're trying to really do here, and we would go into a far deeper analysis of them, where actually, but this gives you kind of a broad where is kind of their problems lying. And often leaders are quite good at talking about the challenges, actually knowing where it needs to be. Well, they should be good. You might find if they're not good, they might not be a leader for very much longer, but actually how and what it needs to be, they're kind of very unclear about. And that's really hard. If they're unclear at the top, then that uncertainty just flows through. So that's an interesting point to start with. And then in terms of the ambition, so again, knowing where they need to focus, most people sort of can come up with those broad areas. And if they can't, what I normally say there is those strategy gaps. So this is what we need to achieve, but right now we have no idea with our current capability how we're going to do that. There's a gap. That's where we can focus it. Have you determined how each innovation horizon will be supported and funded? Appreciate horizon might need explaining, but if you think about the strategy intro, that core growth and explore is a good way to think about that. And then do your leadership mechanisms encouraging it. And if they don't start thinking about that, they literally would then just launch straight into making it happen. And that's where often they don't think about, oh, well, I've got to fund it. Yeah, you have. I don't know why it happens. So that's kind of gives you some perspectives of where to work. Ian, any reflections on what Harvey has put so far? Can you see the Miro board, by the way?
Yeah, can you? Yeah, I think it makes sense. I mean, I think, you know, that if they're not clear on what the organization's future state needs to be, you sort of you'd have to question whether they know how the organization needs to change to give sustainable success. So there's a bit of a binary thing there. They're not they're not always different. They're usually the same. But nevertheless, it's, I mean, obviously this is what Javier has found, but I'm just saying it's unusual that they would have expressed focus. Actually, maybe not. I mean, as you rightly say, Harvey, some clients, you know, they go full steam ahead and they start saying these are our targets for innovation, without really understanding how that links to the strategic level and the future strategy. So, I mean, that's why we have these questions, because they're they're designed to sort of tease out these nuances and tease out these in many ways sort of contradictions within the leadership team.
Harvey, a practical question.
Sure.
Will you run this first as kind of a survey within the management team, and then have the whole group discuss either the results or try to answer them as a group? Because I was just thinking, and sorry to step in here, Javier, if I had had this discussion when I started working with the Guatemalan company, and I would say that probably they would have answered yes to most of these questions. And, you know, in retrospective, it was clearly a lot of no's. But then I can picture that if I have run this first individually, I would have gotten a lot of no's, you know, from the management team. So just wondering, how would you approach it?
Yeah, I think this is very much what I would say is our light kind of assessment, just to kind of find out where broadly do we need to start focusing. What we would do probably without having this perspective is have a number of one-to-one interviews with leadership, the utility company that Ian's talked about, is that we're obviously going to be talking to the team one-on-one. We'll be talking to the partners, external partners they work with, be talking to the stakeholders that they have. Also, and really starting to bring those together and produce a readout. And what we call is, you know, discover your truth. What this is trying to do is to give you as I guess coaches, let's call you that, global coaches, is how can I spot where work might need to be done? How can I have an interesting conversation with a leader that, you know, when we talk about doing innovation, most people start automatically focusing on ideas. And actually ideas comes out right, almost not towards the end, but it's kind of the middle of the process. And so actually, have you set up the organization for success to be able to do something with those ideas? And are you getting the ideas focused on the right problems? And do you know how much you need to fund those? Because there's a phrase when we were in Cisco, the innovation ideas often land on the island of misfit toys. You know, there's so many ideas that have no ownership. They're just orphans. They sit on this island, and there are tons of great ideas, but nobody wanted them. Nobody needed them. And it was kind of, there wasn't this link up between the strategic side of things. So I talk more about how we would go for this, you know, sort of deep dive if you had somebody you wanted to work with, and how we would do that. But this is just that light kind of, this is where I think they might have an issue around innovation. It can either be used with you knowing enough about the client, or, as you said, a one-to-one conversation.
Harvey, can I just make a quick point? What you often find is, well, firstly, you know, chief executives, particularly chief execs of big companies, and actually any size company, I guess, they have a fairly limited time span. So this is really just a very, you know, quick and dirty way of saying, look, if you're really serious about innovation and you think you're doing innovation well, just have a look at these, you know, key questions. There's what, 12, 20, there's 18, okay? And what you normally find is, if you look at that fourth column, processes and tools, they generally always answer yes to those three there. Because if they're doing something around innovation, they have some form of process and they might have some tools, and they probably think they're experimenting. But actually, when you challenge them to think about, is that actually linked back to your strategy and your long-term ambition? And are you really measuring it properly and embedding it in innovation? There's usually a lot of no's on the left and on the right. And that actually makes them realize that in terms of a, you know, holistic, systemic approach to getting as much impact from innovation as you could, you know, there's a long way for them to go. So that's the first point. The other point that somebody mentioned about, you know, often clients will answer yes, but when you get in and start working with them, the reality is somewhat different. That's absolutely true. And when we move to the next stage, which is the diagnostic, what we will always do is do what we call an artifact review or a document review. And we will give them a list of documents that we'd like to see. So that, you know, when we have the interviews with them and they say, oh, yes, we have a comprehensive set of metrics that are aligned up and down the organization,
will say, well, that's really interesting because we've never seen those, and they haven't been provided to us, and everybody else we've talked to hasn't found them either. So I think it's always quite useful when you move beyond this stage, if you can start doing that document review right at the start of the project. Are we moving on to that now, Harvey?
Yeah, let's move on. Harvey is putting some more no's in here.
Because we only have 10 minutes, I think. Is that right? Or sorry, 15 minutes.
15 minutes, I think. So
yes.
So let's so Harvey, you've put no for those people, and I think one of the things that I often find, and this is one of the things, is innovation responsibility is not at the top level, and Ian mentioned that earlier on. Is that the chief executive should be your chief innovation officer, and obviously can't do that. Also, there's often somebody on the C-suite, but if that isn't, and there are 4 levels below, and you're trying to change an organization that is inherently built around your current business operation, it's very hard to make innovation actually happen. So I think that's something that we would really sort of challenge those things in terms of how you execute it. And the other thing is around how does each division understand their role? And we find that some divisions are very good at doing it, and then some divisions don't understand the hindrances they bring. Normally bringing compliance and finance into those 2 areas. It's like, well, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. They're just like, and how do you do it despite those areas? So it's actually, do they understand how they enable innovation? So, so Javier, that's fantastic you put there. So I hope you're finding this interesting in terms of what you're spotting there. I'm just going to, do you want to do the last ones around manage as well? I don't know how clear you could be on those ones, Javier.
Yeah, give me a second.
So just those. I should probably show where, see where you are. Oh, there we are. So just to say, one of the things that I've often seen is innovation can be a very secret thing. Now, I found that when I was in Allianz, one of the things that unlocked performance for us were by visibly sharing the innovation performance across each division. Yes, we didn't sometimes share all the ideas because they could be commercially sensitive, but actually in terms of who's having the ideas, who's doing what, certainly got the leadership involved. There was a league table, there was some value. They were like, oh, I'm at the bottom of the list, and I always remember the HR director going, can we do it a pro rata per person, because I've got a really small organization and I'm always at the bottom of the list. And so that became very interesting, but all of a sudden it became a conversation. And one of the things I would say, if you're sometimes working with an innovation team, they can find it very hard to get the attention of leadership. And as soon as it becomes a metric that is reported on and looked at and discussed, then they want to know how they can perform better in that way. So I can see how Javier, where you've put all the notes. So I think when we started this off, you're kind of getting a view of where do you start in this process, and some of these things isn't this kind of chronological. We do strategy, then operational, then manage. You might sometimes find you've got this bit of a loop that you're going back and forth. Things are independent. Interdependency. We'd always start with strategy, start off with that strategic understanding, and then how that works out through the operation. And then processes and tools, measure and monitor, and individual organization all help to feed each other in terms of that circle. It all helped. So, Javier, thank you for testing the first test that we run through that. How did you appreciate your kind of being, sort of guessing at some of these things? How did you find that? Was that helpful to go through some of those perspectives?
I think that it's extremely helpful, because usually I think that one of the challenges with innovation efforts in organizations is how to make it repeatable. Because usually, organizations have some wins, and once they get them, they feel innovation is just great. It's perfect. But I think that the major challenge is how do you make this something that happens constantly? And I think that this kind of tools help organizations to understand what they are missing to make it that way. So that's the value, and I also find it quite interesting to begin conversations, because usually, I mean, the first reaction, as you said, is, you know what, we have this group, we have this lab, we have this, we are already great at using some methodologies or tools, so we don't need anything, right? Yeah. And if that's your approach, I mean, that's it. I mean, you won't be able to enter a deeper conversation with the company. Sure. Whereas if you use something like this, which is broader, I mean, you might get a chance to begin those interesting discussions.
Thank you. Thanks, Harvey. Roberto, Alan, Rick, any questions on this?
Just a couple thoughts I had. I would wonder, you know, maybe one way to check. I mean, for example, if you have an organization, if you were to talk to some of the employees or some of the people that is not in your innovation meeting and ask them, you know, what is the plan for innovation? I've been that employee in the past, and I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of these questions are answered and communicated to the board of directors. But as an employee, or as a worker or a professional inside an organization, I have no idea about it. So it's kind of, I wonder if there's some way you could test with the average employee, kind of reconcile some of this stuff.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I've often, when I've been in organizations, been able to, they often would do like an annual employee survey or an engagement survey or something like that. And you could normally, can I insert 2 innovation questions into that? And so see if you can get, you know, some of that kind of flavor, because some organizations hate surveys being sent out. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things we can do is start to create that sort of, you know, that survey. We've just got to sort of work out what's a way of doing that in a fast way that makes sure we get a broad response from many people. You know, what are the key questions we should be asking to their organization's employees?
Yeah, I think a lot of employees and professionals in organizations don't agree with the innovation because it's really more politically driven for whatever direction management is advertising, but the long-term outlook is not really there. Another comment I always hear Alex Osterwalder saying that your CEO, I think it was 50%. The CEO should spend 50% of their time in innovation, or you should look for another job. Yeah. I wonder if you believe that, or I mean, my experience has been about 5% or 1%. Like I don't see anything near 50%, but I'm in the energy business. But what do you think about that?
I think it says even 60%. If I'm
right. 60%.
I think it really is very industry dependent. I would say if you haven't got somebody in your C-suite responsible for innovation, I think that's a red flag. I think the CEO should be your strongest supporter, whether they're spending their time on innovation. Depends what it means. It depends sometimes what their shareholders are expecting from that CEO. But I think it, you know, as Alex would say, it's a very good challenge. Well, why aren't you if you're all about driving the future of your organization? So I think it's a good kind of, well, what should it be then? Is a good question. Ian, your perspective on that?
Well, I think it depends how you define innovation, and that's what we tried to challenge organizations on in that first element. So, you know, clearly different organizations will define the role for innovation in different ways, and that's fine. I mean, we don't go in and say, you have to define the role of innovation in this way. What we say is, you know, are you clear on the role of innovation and how it's going to contribute to and impact your strategy? And are you clear how you're going to, you know, use innovation in your business? I mean, to me, that's more important than giving a number, you know, is it 40s or 50s or 60? I mean, I think any chief executive that I've worked with in a big organization is certainly not spending 60% of their time on innovation. They're spending, you know, 60% of their time on strategy and growing the business and a whole range of other things. But whether they call it innovation will depend upon how they define strategy and innovation within their organization. And I think that's very much dependent upon the individual.
Absolutely. Harvey, maybe my only comment regarding the tool, and I really think this is definitely a great conversation started, is probably there is a common understanding of what innovation means to the company. because I think this is a little bit what Ian was saying. Depending on how the company defines innovation, then you can assess whether the CEO or even the management team is investing enough time. So maybe that's the only maybe piece of information that I would be missing when discussing about strategy. And I also think that I can picture running this kind of exercise even in in different sessions. I just think that, for example, strategy would take quite some time to really assess, and depending on how many no's, it might not even be worth to get yet into the questions of operational and management. And I also think that it will depend on whether you're coming in to really set up the whole, I don't know if the whole would be the right word, but to set up an innovation program, whether you come in to try to fix the existing innovation setup. So in the latter, definitely you want to understand the operational and the managing. If you're coming in to set it up, probably it's more about really getting the strategy in place, getting that expectations on what strategy should be delivering, and then obviously you get into the operational and management. But I think these are great questions, definitely give a very good sense of where a company stands in the innovation. I'm really looking forward to do something together as we discuss regarding these kind of programs.
Cool. Thank you, Roberto. Let me just quickly take you through some, just our sort of last slides in terms of sort of going a little bit deeper. So how does our approach actually work when we work with an organization? We've got three main areas. You would discover your truth, determine your focus, and then enable you to deliver the impact that you need. So the first aspect is really around understanding, this deep dive into an organization, discovering how it currently works or doesn't. What are the interviews, executive interviews, maybe as Alan, you absolutely said, with people, they're normally hand chosen, aren't they? You kind of want to just pick somebody like you. What's the innovation strategy? So let's find out a bit from those guys. Secondary research, what is happening in their organization, analysis, and then providing that report at whoever's level. And then what we do have is in terms of why is this not jumping? I jumped too many slides. This is then turning focus. So we can actually create a really detailed report in terms of each one of those elements that we talked about has sub-elements, and we use the booze balls to really kind of give a view about how people are doing, and can go into that kind of depth, really helping. These are the insights that we've got. These are the objectives. And by having that conversation, you then go, okay, so what do you really want to do with this? How do we start to work together? And then we can start to think. We've got a number of tools. Some of them are related to some of the strategy tools, but some of them are very innovation specific about how we would work those ones through. So this is the way we would go. And I couldn't draw a very good map. I don't have Jolene to create lots of lovely diagrams for me. So this is my roadmap. But this is how we'd work through with somebody, of really about how they deliver the impact that they needed. So that's just some of those things. So in terms of a question I would leave with you guys is there anything we can do to partner together, to work together? If there's any questions you've got that come to you afterwards that you don't want to ask in this recorded session, then let's have a conversation. But it's, we're very sort of excited about what we've come up with. We're trying to find organizations to really develop this and work with. So very happy to work with you. And as all these things create that global partnership to work with you, hopefully. I think that's about it. Ian, anything you wanted to finish off with?
Yeah, just very quickly. We focused a lot on, the diagnostic part. The diagnostic is a means to an end. It's the means to the end of making the organization better at innovation and getting greater impact. And some organizations are happy to do a very, very in-depth diagnosis. Somebody asked about a survey before. I've worked in organizations where the first thing they want is an employee survey. And that goes hand in hand with the executive interviews and the secondary research. So that it can be comprehensive or it can be light touch, but you know, the ultimate aim is to, as we say here, deliver the impact and make the innovation better.
Cool. Any questions that people have? Appreciate we've kind of hit the time frame. Look at that, Andy.
I was just about to say, I am impressed.
Facilitation skills to their finest. Does anybody have any questions or anything people wanted to clarify or ask? All I would say is, if you are going to start using this with a client, can you kind of get us involved so we know what's happening? Because I'd love to hear the feedback. Love to kind of, this is not kind of open source quite yet. We're trying to work out how to use this. It's very much to kind of test and learn, but very happy to support you in any of those conversations that you have. Yeah, thanks for joining the session. Thanks for Javier. Thank you so much for being the guinea pig and testing it. Thanks for your interaction. Really appreciate it. Anything that comes to you after us, feel free, and you know where we are. We'll be here for the next 2 days. So great, but thank you guys.
Yeah, Harvey, do you have like a business case of the first clients you've been applying this? I mean, that would be nice. Like,
yeah, we hope to shortly.
Okay.
So I think that's the thing. We both know that it would work. We're just kind of trying to, we don't have the official kind of client. We've got a couple that are thinking about it, and then we will, you know, one of the conditions is that we can then talk about it. One in the kind of energy industry, or the sort of almost building services energy side of things, and obviously one within water utilities. Very happy to get another sector involved to really test how that could work.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to cut us off there, Harvey, because I want to give everyone at least 8 minutes for them to go and have a quick break. I have just posted in the chat links through to the next session. So we have developing clusters in Mexico with our very own Javier, who's on the call with us. If you wanted to know more about the digital accelerator solutions, please check out Christian and Teaching Entrepreneurship with Rick. We'll be restarting in 7 minutes at the top of the hour. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Harvey. We're a pleasure working with you. Cheers, Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.